Hi, my name's Steve and welcome to the Seaside Allotment channel, and today I just thought I'd quickly talk about the broad beans. We've had a fantastic harvest of broad beans this year. We've probably harvested something like 75 kilos, and I'll pop some pictures up just showing you the area that we harvested those from. Yeah, it's been by far the best harvest. And I'll just talk quickly about the way that we prep the beds. So we have very sandy soil here. And so what we did was we put down a good thick mulch of spent mushroom compost, but before we did that, underneath that we put down some seaweed meal for micronutrients. You don't need to put any nitrogen fertiliser down really for broad beans because they take it from the air, and that's pretty much all we did. And so there was a few other things that I think really made it a success. The location that we grew these broad beans in was very sheltered. It's sheltered by a great big hedge, and surprisingly, that hedge blocks out a lot of light through winter because it's pretty high, and it's only like 6 foot between the hedge and the start of the broad bean bed. But basically didn't notice really any significant difference between the growth of the broad beans closest to the hedge and the ones 2 or 3 meters away from the hedge. So light levels didn't seem to be a big effect, but they really liked the shelter that came from that hedge. So that was a big plus. And an important lesson learned really, because you'd think over winter, most of the growing of those broad beans takes place, in winter and early spring, that light levels would be important. The hedge is south facing. So yeah, that was important. The second thing is we put like a little, quite low, probably about 1 meter high, little windbreak up around the other side of one of the broad bean beds, and that was just a bit of plastic polythene, basically. It was 1 meter wide strip of polythene, and that windbreak also made a really big difference. We got the broad beans there 2 weeks earlier probably, and we got a bigger crop as well. And I was really pleased that all these broad beans, they all came at the same time, which was really convenient because it meant that, basically over the last 3 or 4 weeks we've been harvesting them, but the bulk of the harvest could all take place at one time. So we harvested 75 kilos, and probably about 60 of those kilos we harvested in one weekend pretty much. And obviously they're all processed and frozen now. And people who watch my videos will know that I don't freeze very much. We much prefer fresh food, and we go to quite extreme lengths really just to have fresh food all the time, all year round, obviously, because we're self-sufficient in veg. But broad beans are one of those exceptions because they're so easy to freeze and they're so quick, not quick really, so easy to freeze, and they freeze so well. And nice and compact in terms of storage. They're just ideal really for freezing, and obviously they get a nice bulk harvest. So that is the end of broad beans for us. We started harvesting them about a month ago. We've just finished now, so we've got loads in the freezer. But it's not the end of broad beans for the year, because we're also harvesting the garlic, and in place, and I'll talk a bit more about garlic in another video, but basically when we strip the garlic out, we're planting another variety of broad beans that we grew last year as well, and I'll put the name up in the description because it's one that I can't remember, but it's ideal for autumn harvests. Now, I've not really had much success with other broad beans planted at this time of year. So in 2 or 3 weeks time, basically, once those beds have been cleared and prepped in between the strawberries, where we've just harvested the garlic, in will go the next lot of broad beans, and so they'll be ready for autumn. So hopefully those will be ready and harvested before we strip that crop of broad beans out and put garlic and onions back in those beds for next year. But that's not the end of the broad bean story, because once we've harvested the early autumn brassicas and the onions, the spring planted onions, then we'll be clearing those beds, preparing them, remulching them, and planting those with field beans. And the field beans are effectively just a broad bean, but they're much smaller. I'll actually put a photo up now of what the field beans look like, and we have actually tried eating them as mulched beans, but they're a little bit strong tasting for me. But anyway, we plant those field beans, and most people just use those as what do you call it? A green manure. But we don't do that. We put them in as a combination really of a green manure and a winter spinach harvest, basically. And that's proved to be fantastic. So come sort of October, November time, as I say, we'll be clearing that, and we'll just broadcast these field beans over the cleared soil, and then we mulch on top of it with spent mushroom compost. And you know, November, December time, up will spring those field beans, and we just pinch out the tips. We pinch out the tips when the plants are only about this size, and they just throw out new shoots from the base, and they just keep on doing that. You just keep pinching out the tips, and out comes the new shoots, and they're absolutely great. I love them in the smoothies. They're a really mild green, really healthy as well. Although you do have to be careful, like with lots of greens, not to have too many of them, because they do have oxalic acid in them. Yeah, so I like them in the smoothies. Some people love them in salads. Personally, I'm not a massive fan of them in salads. But then you can cook them just like you can any spinach green, basically. And the beauty of them is really that they provide a beautiful continuity, because you know, if you think of the sort of life cycle of spinach, so really in winter spinach is not very prolific. You know, if you've got it under cover, you can take the odd leaf off it, but you're not getting a huge amount of spinach in December, January and February. It picks up a bit in February, but these field beans are fantastic in December, January and February and into March. So by the time we're finishing with the field beans in March and transitioning that bed over to brassicas, the true spinach is coming on really strong. And we use the true spinach all the way through until, well, about now really. And the true spinach is just bolting all the time. So you plant it, you get one harvest off it or something that's bolted. So we don't bother with it now. So we're now transitioning from true spinach to New Zealand spinach. So that transition sort of takes place in June. And then we'll have New Zealand spinach all the way through until sort of September, October time, by which time the August and September planted true spinach is taking over from the New Zealand spinach. And then that true spinach will run until December time, at which time we transition over to the field beans. And the field beans have one more advantage, which is that whilst they're growing away there, they're fixing loads of nitrogen into little nodules on the roots, and everybody knows about this. But what not everybody knows is that those nodules are depleted of nitrogen if you let the field beans flower and grow pods. But if you harvest them before then, so harvest them just as they're starting to come into flower, which is effectively just the time you want to be planting your brassicas, so if you chop them down then, leave the roots in, then they're absolutely full of nitrogen, which the brassicas love. So that's the way to grow field beans. And don't just leave them as a green manure, basically, because it's such a waste. We took probably nearly £1,000 worth of field bean tops off the bed, and that's a fantastic kind of free crop. And of course, it keeps the weeds down, looks nice, tastes good, it's healthy, and it builds nitrogen in the soil. So what we also did, by the way, was we chopped up the tops, and we put those tops on the squash bed, and then we mulched the squash bed on top of the chopped up field bean tops, and so they will rot down and provide a nice boost to the squash bed as well. So I think that's the broad bean story for me. So yeah, in previous years I've been a bit ambivalent with broad beans. I'm actually not a massive fan of mature broad beans, but the rest of the family absolutely love them. I like them when they're about that size, so about half the size of a mature one, and then they're really succulent and juicy and tasty. When they're mature, they get a bit starchy for me, and I'm not so keen on the starchy sort of floury kind of consistency. But as I say, everybody else loves that, so it doesn't really matter. And there's always a few small ones, which is enough to keep me happy. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you soon.